Welcome to Virgo Potens. I invite you to give this video a like and to subscribe to my channel. YouTube has introduced a great feature called Super Thanks. If you enjoy this video, you can support my work or say thank you by clicking on the Super Thanks icon. It's similar to offering support through a super chat. Book 2 of Prophecies and Revelations of Saint Bridget of Sweden. Jesus Christ speaks to the bride and compares his divine nature to a crown, and uses Peter and Paul to symbolize the clerical and the lay state, and about the ways of dealing with enemies, and about the qualities that knights in the world should have. Chapter 7. The Son spoke to the bride, saying, I am the King of the crown. Do you know why I said King of the crown? Because my divine nature was and will be and is without beginning or end. My divine nature is aptly likened to a crown, because a crown has neither starting point nor end. Just as a crown is reserved for the future king in a kingdom, so too my divine nature was reserved for my human nature to be its crown. I had 2 servants. One was a priest, the other a layman. The first was Peter, who had a priestly office, while Paul was, as it were, a layman. Peter was bound in marriage, but when he saw that his marriage was not consistent with his priestly office, and considering that his upright intention might be endangered by a lack of continence, he separated himself from the otherwise licit marriage, in which he divorced himself from his wife's bed, and he devoted himself to me wholeheartedly. Paul, however, did observe celibacy and kept himself unstained by the marriage bed. See what great love I had for these 2. I gave the keys of heaven to Peter, so that whatever he bound or loosed on earth might be bound or loosed in heaven. I allowed Paul to become like Peter in glory and honor, as they were equals together on earth, so now they are united in everlasting glory in heaven, and glorified together. However, although I mentioned these 2 expressly by name, by and through them I mean to denote other friends of mine as well. In similar fashion, under the earlier covenant, I used to speak to Israel as if I were addressing just one person, although I meant to designate the entire people of Israel by that one name. In the same way now, using these 2 men, I mean to denote the multitude of those whom I have filled with my glory and love. With the passage of time, evils began to multiply, and the flesh began to grow weaker, and to be more than usually prone to evil. Therefore, I set up norms for each of the 2, that is, for the clergy and laity, represented here by Peter and Paul. In my mercy, I decided to allow the clergy to own a moderate amount of church property for their bodily needs, in order that they might grow more fervent and constant in serving me. I also allowed the laity to join in marriage according to the rites of the church. Among the priests there was a certain good man, who thought to himself, the flesh drags me toward base pleasure, the world drags me towards harmful sights, while the devil sets various traps to get me to sin. Therefore, in order not to be ensnared by carnal pleasure, I will observe moderation in all my actions. I will be moderate in my rest and recreation. I will dedicate the proper time to work and prayer, and restrain my carnal appetites through fasting. Second, in order that the world may not drag me away from the love of God, I will give up all worldly things, for they are all perishable. It is safer to follow Christ in poverty. Third, in order not to be deceived by the devil, who is always showing us falsehoods instead of the truth, I will submit myself to the rule and obedience of another. and I will reject all selfishness and show that I am ready to undertake whatever is commanded me by the other person. This man was the first to establish a monastic rule. He persevered in it in praiseworthy fashion, and left his life as an example to be imitated by others. For a time the class of the laity was well organized. Some of them tilled the soil and bravely persevered in working the land. Others sailed on ships and carried merchandise to other regions, so that the resources of one region supplied the needs of another. Others were diligent craftsmen and artisans. Among these were the defenders of my church, who are now called knights. They took up arms as avengers of the Holy Church in order to do battle against her enemies. There appeared among them a good man and friend of mine who thought to himself, I do not till the soil as a farmer. I do not toil on the seas as a merchant. I do not work with my hands as a skilled craftsman. What then can I do, or with what works can I please my God? I am not energetic enough in the service of the Church. My body is too soft and weak to bear physical injuries. My hands lack the force to strike down enemies, and my mind grows uneasy in pondering the things of heaven. What can I do then? I know what I can do. I will go and bind myself to a stable oath to a secular prince, swearing to defend the faith of the Holy Church with my strength and with my blood. That friend of mine went to the prince and said, My lord, I am one of the defenders of the Church. My body is all too weak to bear physical injuries. My hands lack the force to strike down others. My mind is unstable when it comes to thinking about and carrying out what is good. My self-will is what pleases me, and my need for rest does not let me take a strong stance for the house of God. I bind myself therefore with a public oath of obedience to the Holy Church and to you, O Prince, swearing to defend her all the days of my life, in order that, although my mind and will may be lukewarm with respect to the struggle, I can be held and compelled to toil because of my oath. The prince answered him, I will go with you to the house of the Lord, and be a witness to your oath and your promise. Both of them came up to my altar, and my friend genuflected and said, I am too weak of body to bear physical injuries. My self-will is all too pleasing to me. My hands are too lukewarm when it comes to striking blows. Therefore, I now pledge obedience to God and to you, my chief, binding myself by an oath to defend the Holy Church against her enemies, to comfort the friends of God, to do good to the widows, orphans, and God's faithful, and never to do anything contrary to God's church or the faith. Moreover, I will submit myself to your correction, if I should happen to err, in order that, bound by obedience, I might fear sin and selfishness all the more and apply myself more fervently and readily to carrying out God's will and your own will, knowing myself to be only the more worthy of condemnation and contempt if I should presume to violate obedience and transgress your commands. After this profession had been made at my altar, the prince wisely decided that the man should dress differently than other laymen, as a sign of his self-renouncement, and as a reminder to him that he had a superior to whom he had to submit. The prince also placed a sword in his hand, saying, This sword is for you to use to threaten and slay the enemies of God. He placed a shield on his arm, saying, Defend yourself with this shield against the missiles of the enemy, and patiently endure whatever is thrown against it. May you sooner see it shattered than run away from battle. In the presence of my priest, who was listening, my friend made the firm promise to observe all of this. When he had made his promise, the priest gave him my body to provide him strength and fortitude so that, once united with me through my body, my friend might never be separated from me. Such was my friend George, as well as many others. Such, too, should all the knights be. They should get to hold their title as a result of merit, and to wear their knightly attire as a result of their actions in defense of the holy faith. Hear how my enemies are now going against the earlier deeds of my friends. My friends used to enter the monastery out of their wise reverence and love for God, but those who are in monasteries nowadays go out into the world because of pride and greed, following self-will, fulfilling the pleasure of their bodies. Justice demands that people who die in such a disposition should not experience the joy of heaven, but rather obtain the endless punishment of hell. Know, too, that the cloistered monks who are forced against their will to become prelates out of love for God are not to be counted among their number. The knights who used to bear my arms were ready to lay down their lives for justice and shed their blood for the sake of the holy faith, bringing justice to the needy, putting down and humbling the doers of evil. But hear how they now have been corrupted. Now they would rather die in battle for the sake of pride, greed, and envy at the promptings of the devil, instead of living after my commandments and obtaining eternal joy. Just wages will therefore be dealt out at the judgment to all the people who die in such a disposition, and their souls will be yoked to the devil forever. But the knights who serve me will receive their due wages in the heavenly host forever. I, Jesus Christ, true God and true man, one with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever, have said this. Christ's words to the bride about a certain knight's desertion from the true army, that is, from humility, obedience, patience, faith, etc., to the false one, that is, to the opposing vices, pride, etc., and the description of his condemnation, and about how one can meet with condemnation because of an evil will just as much as because of evil deeds. Chapter 8. I am the true Lord. There is no other Lord greater than I. There was no Lord before me, nor will there be any after me. All lordship comes from me and through me. This is why I am the true Lord, and why no one but I alone can truly be called Lord, for all power comes from me. I was telling you earlier that I had 2 servants, one of whom manfully took up a praiseworthy way of life and kept it manfully to the end. Countless others followed him in that same way of knightly service. I will now tell you about the first man to desert the profession of knighthood as instituted by my friend. I will not tell you his name, because you do not know him by name, but I will disclose his purpose and desire. A man who wanted to become a knight came to my sanctuary. When he went in, he heard a voice. 3 things are necessary if you want to be a knight. First, you must believe that the bread you see on the altar is true God and true man, the Creator of heaven and earth. Second, once you take up your knightly service, you must exercise more self-restraint than you were accustomed to doing before. Third, you should not care about worldly honor. Rather, I will give you divine joy and everlasting honor. Hearing this and pondering these 3 things to himself, he heard an evil voice in his mind making 3 proposals contrary to the first 3. It said, "If you serve me, I will make you 3 other proposals. I will let you take what you see, hear what you like, and obtain what you desire." When he heard this, he thought to himself, "The first Lord bade me to have faith in something I do not see, and promised me things unknown to me. He bade me abstain from the delights that I can see, and that I desire, and to hope for things which I am uncertain. The other Lord promised me the worldly honor that I can see, and the pleasure that I desire, without forbidding me to hear or see the things I like. Surely it is better for me to follow him, and to have what I see, and to enjoy the things that are sure, rather than to hope for things of which I am uncertain." With thoughts such as these, This man was the first to commence the destruction from the service of a true knight. He rejected the true profession and broke his promise. He threw down the shield of patience at my feet and let the sword for the defense of the faith drop from his hands and left the sanctuary. The evil voice told him, "If, as I said, you would be mine, then you should walk proudly in the fields and streets." That other Lord commands his men to be constantly humble. Therefore, be sure not to avoid any sign of pride and ostentation. While that other Lord made his entrance in obedience and subjected himself to obedience in every way, you should let no one be your superior. Bend not your neck in humility to another. Take up your sword to shed the blood of your neighbor and brother in order to acquire his property. Strap the shield to your arm and risk your life for the sake of winning renown. Instead of the faith that he holds out, give your love to the temple of your own body without abstaining from any of the pleasures that you delight. While the man was making up his mind and strengthening his resolve with such thoughts, his prince laid his hand on the man's neck in the appointed place. No place whatsoever can harm anyone who has a good will, or help anyone whose intention is wicked. After the confirmation of his knighthood, the wretch betrayed his knightly service, exercising it only with a view to worldly pride, making light of the fact that he was now under a greater obligation to live an austere life than before. Countless armies of knights imitated and still imitate this knight in his pride, and he has sunk all the deeper into the abyss due to his knightly vows. But given that there are many people who want to rise in the world and achieve renown, but do not manage to do so, you might ask, are these people to be punished for the wickedness of their intentions as much as those who achieve their desired success? To this I answer you, I assure you that anyone who fully intends to rise in the world and does all he can to do so, in order to gain an empty title of worldly honor, although his intention never achieves its effect due to some secret decision of mine, such a man will be punished for the wickedness of his intention, just as much as the one who does manage to achieve it, that is, unless he rectifies his intention through penance. Look, I will put to you the example of two persons known well enough to many people. One of them prospered according to his wishes and obtained almost everything he desired. The other had the same intention, but not the same possibilities. The first one obtained worldly renown. He loved the temple of his body in its every lust. He had the power he wanted. Everything he put his hand to prospered. The other was identical to him in intention, but received less renown. He would willingly have shed his neighbor's blood 100 times over in order to be able to realize his plans of greed. He did what he could and carried out his will in accordance with his desire. These two were alike in their horrible punishment. Although they did not die at exactly the same time, I can still speak of one soul rather than two, since their condemnation was one and the same. Both had the same thing to say when body and soul were separated and the soul departed. Once having left the body, the soul said to it, "Tell me, where now are the sights to delight my eyes that you promised me? Where is the pleasure you showed me? Where are the pleasant words that you bade me use?" The devil was there and answered, "The promised sights are no more than dust. The words are but air. The pleasure is but mud and rot. Those things are of no value to you now." The soul exclaimed then, "Alas, alas, I have been wretchedly deceived. I see three things. I see him who was promised to me under the semblance of bread. He is the very King of kings and Lord of lords. I see what he promised, and it is indescribable and inconceivable. I hear now that the abstinence he recommended was really most useful. Then, in an even louder voice, the soul cried out, "Woe!" 3 times. "Woe is me that ever I was born! Woe is me that my life on earth was so long! Woe is me that I shall live in a perpetual and never-ending death! Behold, what wretchedness the wretched will have in return for their contempt of God and their fleeting joy. You should therefore thank me, my bride, for having called you away from such wretchedness. Be obedient to my spirit and to my chosen ones."
Welcome to the Virgo Potens YouTube channel. If you enjoy this video, give it a like. I also invite you to subscribe to this channel so that you won't miss new content. Please prayerfully consider supporting my work by becoming a patron of Virgo Potens on Patreon and/or by buying one of my books. My ebooks are available on Amazon as well as on the Apple Bookstore. For those who prefer a physical copy rather than an ebook, my book, Spiritual Warfare, Know Thy Enemy, is also available as a paperback on Amazon. If you are interested in making a one-time contribution, I suggest that you do so by simply buying one of my books. I am thankful for your support. Links to Patreon and to my books will be posted in the comments section of this video. The continuation of this work isn't possible without you. Lastly, and most importantly, please pray for me. May the Virgin Most Powerful guide and protect you.